This is without a doubt the best occult detective I've read this month. Hi, I'm Annie, and it's time to join me on some obscure book adventures. Occult Detective October is coming to an end, and Occult Detective October was the brainchild of MJ over at Reading This Live. I will link her channel and all of the other co-hosts in the description box below. So, what is an occult detective? Well, it's a detective with magical and elements in it, and sorcery, and all that kind of occult things. So, have I got a gem for you? I've read Dr. Death versus the Secret 12. And it is all you want from a pulpy occult detective. From a pulpy detective. It has, it's very fast paced. It has a lot of action. It has an evil mastermind. It has magic. It has zombies. It's some melodramatic points in the stories, but it's highly entertaining. It is really excellent. And what is super fun, it is that regular Joe is fighting all this magic going on, masterminded by this evil scientist. Dr. Death was originally published in a short story in Occult Detective magazine. And that was in 1935. And this wasn't the same Dr. Death as in this story, but I read somewhere that Dr. Death issue, or that Occult Detective magazine issue with Dr. Death illustration on the cover sold so well. So it sold terrific amounts of issues. And they decided to give Dr. Death his own magazine. So in 1935, 3 issues of Dr. Death was versus the Secret 12 was issued or was released. And regrettably, it were only 3 stories that were published. It's unclear exactly why they discontinued this series, but it probably has something to do with the fact that there are a lot of innocent people who die in these stories, and well, it is Dr. Death, so he has to appear in every story. So our hero is unable to give this evil mastermind a final, definite, mortal blow. So that something has to do with it, I think. The concept of an evil mastermind as at the heart of a series was a new concept in the 1930s. Regrettably, it didn't last very long, I'm afraid. But it's really Harold Ward, who wrote these stories, really did an excellent job. The 3 stories that were published are now available in this 2009 edition of Dr. Death versus the Secret 12. But Harold Ward wrote more stories than there were published. It lasted until after his death. He wrote 2 additional stories because he was ordered to, and they never published it in 1935. It took years and years after Ward died that they were published in 1988 in Nemesis Incorporated magazine. And these two additional stories were published in the second volume of Dr. Death. But first, let's talk about the first three stories in this first edition, of in this first volume. In the first story, we meet Dr. Death. Well, who is Dr. Death? Dr. Death was a brilliant scientist before he went a bit mad. He was brilliant, even more brilliant so than Einstein himself. He was excellent. Then he got a message from God that said, well, he thinks he got a message from God that said that he had to restore the world to its original state. So what is that, its original state? Well, before science got in. So we have to go back to the Dark Ages and to even before that, basically to the Garden of Eden. It's not mentioned in this novel, but you get the gist. No cars, no planes, no scientific medical things, no scientific warfare, no science whatsoever. And he says he has the mission to destroy all of science and scientific means and scientific things. So in the first story, the 12 must die, he sort of terrorizes the American public or the world by saying that he will kill the 12 most important scientists in the world. And for some unclear reason, these 12 are all Americans. Well, of course, it's the 1930s. And America was at the time the best and the most scientific and the most cultivated country in the world. Well, anyway, the police have trouble catching him because he can strike. He has magical powers, and he strikes people that where they stand. So the police force ask our hero Jimmy Holm, who is an occult specialist, to help them fight this evil terrorist maniac. And he does so. And of course, there come all sorts of problems, and the Secret 12 is organized. The Secret 12 are 12 people of the most important people in America. But they are a mingled bunch of people. They are, of course, the President of the United States. Of course, the head of the Secret Service. Of course, Jimmy Holm, our hero and occult specialist. And of course, Inspector Riggs, who is also helping our hero fight this maniac. And, well, other kinds of important people, but also the head of the American mafia. And of course, he's Italian, and there are some stereotypical things going on. Well, it's the 1930s, folks, so you can expect that. So we have to close an eye for that. But the mafia, this leader of the mafia, decides that there will be no crime committed until this madman, Dr. Death, is either killed or captured. So that's all very convenient. So they try to protect the scientists. Of course, some of them die. Of course, some of them are stubborn and do not do what the police and Jimmy Holm tells them what to do. So that's really, really entertaining. What also in this first story is entertaining, and which I think is now not unique, but that is interesting, is that our leading lady is not some sort of damsel in distress. She is really she plays an active part in this story. And she also does some heroic stuff. So that's really entertaining. In this first story, Dr. Death has the upper hand. Dr. Death does the hunting and the killing, so it's really difficult to fight him for our heroes. In the second story, the gray monsters, no, the gray creatures, Dr. Death is more the hunted man. So our hero, Jimmy Holm, Inspector Riggs, and our leading lady, Nina, they hunt him down. And this story brings us to Egypt. And Dr. Death has a new toy. Well, a new toy. He has developed a way to resurrect the dead. He injects them with some metallic substance, and he can create zombies, and with his mind he can control these zombies. Of course, Nina gets kidnapped by Dr. Death, and Jimmy Holm and our Inspector Riggs has to save her. The third story is about Dr. Death shriveling up people. The title is The Shriveling People. No, the shriveling murders. Well, they die when they are miniaturized. And in the first story, we met the Secret 12, the most important people in America. And the Secret 12 decide to make America a military dictatorship. Well, I do not like that very much. Anyway, but it's fiction, so it's only mentioned, and there's plays not an important role in this story. So not sure whether I like that. Then there is some stereotypical 1930s stereotypes of African native people. But it's the 1930s, so That's not that it's okay, but well, you have to read it in the time it was written. Anyway, there's this character Nebo, and Nebo has killed a woman, and he feels guilty about it. And I would have liked to seen that angle more developed. I thought that was a bit of a missed opportunity, but that could have been an opportunity to make the black people, the African people, tribes people, less stereotypical. But like I said, 1930s. And there is, of course, also some typical female behavior. Like all women, Nina is stubborn. Like all women, she gets her way. And like all women, because of it, she gets into trouble. So, the stereotypical things do not only concentrate on the native African people in Africa. So, I thought this was an entertaining story, but a bit of the lesser one of the three stories in this novel. As Harold Ward was under contract before Dr. Death magazine was cancelled, he wrote before that another 2 additional stories that were only published like I think 30 years after the death of Harold Ward. They were published in, I think, Nemesis Incorporated magazine in 1988. But in 2009, these 2 stories were published in the second volume of Dr. Death versus the Secret 12. The first edition of Dr. Death versus the Secret 12 was also published in 2009. The Waves of Madness is, what I'm concerned, the best Dr. Death story that Harold Ward has written. Dr. Death has invented a machine with a visor, and he can see all kinds of people everywhere over the world, and he can concentrate on single people but also on groups of people and make them start raving mad, so mad that they are violently and savage. They are when the waves are directed at them, they become murderers and all kinds of criminals. So it is difficult for our heroes to fight Dr. Death, and that some people think it is a good idea to manipulate the world into another world war doesn't help our heroes fight Dr. Death either. And it says something that these stories were written in 1935. In passing, Hitler and Mussolini are mentioned, but it has a bit of an undertone which the tensions in Europe are described. Not literally, but you can feel something is brewing in society, and it is not a good thing. So it's not a highly critical writings of Harold Ward on society. It's mass market entertainment, what he writes, but he tips on it. He just incorporates it in his story. Then there is the last story, The Red Mist of Death. And in this story, Dr. Death travels to Tibet in China, and he decides that he will use the Chinese people to conquer the world. And it is a case in the 1930s, people were afraid of the Chinese. It was the times of, well, they called it Yellow Peril. And communism the people were afraid of communism because in Russia, 1917, the Russian Revolution was started and the communists won that revolution. In China, the Communist Party was formed in 1921. Although in 1935 they weren't in power yet, people were afraid of Chinese communism. And so the typical evil Chinese are depicted in this story. But there is also a Chinese hero. Of course, he's half American or naturalized American. But he is Chinese and he is definitely a hero in this novel. He helps Jimmy home, Nina and Rick's fight Dr. Death. To conclude, this is the best pulp I've read so far. I can highly recommend it. It is action-packed. The plots are good. Every chapter has really, these are short chapters, so it's really quick to read. Oh well, for most people, not me. But it is so much entertaining. It is a bit melodramatic at times, like these typical how we now think of the silent film era. We think that there were this happens and I'm frightened and oh my god and all that sorts of exaggerated things. There are not too much in this book, but a little bit so that it is entertaining. Of course, the silent film era wasn't like that at all. It's just like how we like to look back on the silent film era, that we think in these stereotypical things. So I can highly recommend Dr. Death, Volume 1 and Volume 2. So, have you read Dr. Death or any other similar pulp stories? What are your favorite pulp stories and pulp novels? I'd like to hear it in the comments below. Thanks for watching.